keep in check what their personal goals are and like what the kids actually want to do or would be happy doing. Just because the parents want to see a view doesn't necessarily mean the kids care about that. So when I take families, I really try and kind of ask questions beyond, okay, maybe you're interested in doing a mountain, but maybe the kids are just interested in going to a waterfall or going on a longer hike where they get to go swimming at the end. It's kind of about figuring out what would motivate the kids and help them to have a great time so that their first experiences or those early experiences are really fun for them, and then slowly increase, the difficulty levels and the lengths of the trips as the kids are already starting to become hikers.
Sure.
So you have to start slow. You can't go couch to podium.
Man, everything you just said, everyone listening, if you've never hiked with kids before and you're trying to figure that out, you just said so much gold in that sentence from my own experiences too. And like, I just want to, recap. You mentioned the parents might be interested in a mountain and views, but it doesn't mean the kids are. I have found that to be the case tremendously with my own children as well. They don't see the views the same way we do. It's not as, majestical to them as it is to us. Whereas a short little hike to a waterfall might be so much better for them. They might like that so much more. And I think that's so clutch. And it's exactly the case that they have a vastly different perspective on the hike than we do. And going at their pace is what you have to go at. And by going right to a mountain, you're guaranteed, even for an adult, I mean, you go right to something you can't handle. It's a terrible experience. Hiking is a terrible experience if you're not physically and mentally ready and capable to do what you're doing. It's a terrible experience. So that's why even with people beginning hiking, adults or kids, you have to start small and then, slowly work your way up, in a linear fashion. With that, so Cascade was your first high peak as a kid when you were 5. So what other mountains do you remember doing before that? Or did Dad just bring you right to Cascade?
No, I think he would have been happy to bring me right to Cascade. But no, we definitely lived a very adventurous lifestyle. So we were out hiking and doing smaller trips and canoeing. And I was very exposed to the outdoors, I think far more than most children would be, that are not living in the high peaks or not living in that kind of environment or that kind of parental unit. So I would say, if you're living in a more traditional family style, again, get outside a little bit more just to the parks and the small places and see how the kids even just like being outside, like being dirty,
Sure.
all of that, and get them just comfortable with it and feeling normal about it.
Yeah, that's a very big point, is how much do they want to do it? And if they don't really want to, it's going to be a terrible day. I know that from my own experience. Like if I hike with my 5-year-old, I guess she's 6 now as of last week, but I took her up Cobble Hill when she was 3. That was her first hike. And, she climbed the whole thing. And that week, it's all she wanted to do, hike. Oh, let's go on another hike. Let's go up Cobble Hill again. So I took her up again. And I was like, oh, man, yes, this is great. She's really getting into this. And then I'll say, hey, you want to go hike Cobble Hill? And I took her once, and she just did not want to hike that day. She didn't want to do it, and it was terrible. It was awful. So if the child doesn't want to go, you can't make them, because it is just going to be the worst day of your life. Don't even try.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge bummer for parents when they have all these plans and ideas and this dream scenario going in their minds, and they've been planning all week to go on this hike, and then the kids wake up and they're having a crabby, horrible day, or don't feel good. You have to be flexible about it, and I think that maybe is the key word in all of it in relation to children being outdoors and hiking. Is you got to be flexible, and you just got to go with the flow, and you got to let them kind of lead the day in a sense.
Sure. I do think I will say, actually, there's a caveat to that. This is with my experience, like if they don't want to, my daughter's young, whereas like a 9 or a 10-year-old, it's a different situation if they just don't want to because they just are being
want to play video games or something.
Yes, exactly. There is a difference in that
scenario.
versus like taking a 4-year-old out where it's like it will be a meltdown and dad's carrying them out versus like a 10-year-old that, you know, just doesn't want to go. But if you make them go, they might, as the day goes, get a little more into it, and they'll, you know.
Or even just adjusting the plan. Maybe it, like we were saying, like, you know, maybe it changes from the type of hike you were going to do to something that they might be more interested in that day. And, you know, getting to know your kids in a way of like, are they really into swimming? And that would be fun for them to go to a pond and swim and hike into something like that. Or are they into wildlife and they want to see birds and bugs and things like that? Then there's plenty of wetlands and cool spots to go to take them for that. You know, it's finding kind of your niche and keeping the kids motivated based on that. You know, they're going to wake up in the morning and want to go do it because they're already excited to go see the waterfall and get wet.
Totally. So. Now, have you ever been out there and, you know, started to see some red flags that, oh no, we might not make it up there. This might turn into a child meltdown here in the backcountry?
Yeah, for sure. I think sometimes it's been mostly with like families that are on vacation. The kids are usually like overtired already or overstimulated from doing all of the activities that they've been doing with the campsites and just being away from home. And so you just have to kind of keep an eye on how everyone's doing all of the time. And I think, you know, even as a parent, you can just keep an eye on what's everyone's energy level. You know, do we need snacks, or are we like nearing meltdown stage? And I think you always want to avoid even getting close to the meltdown stage, and also keeping in mind that you have to get back to the car. So not pushing it so far that now you're carrying your 6-year-old out 3 miles from Marcy Dam. So again, it's a bummer for parents when it doesn't work out the way that you want it to. But some of that is just planning and picking the right hike and not pushing yourself too far or the kids too far.
And calling a guide service like yourself to know what is the right hike and what is not, if you're not familiar with the area, is a super important thing.
And that's been a majority of our families. Have been people who don't necessarily know the area, so they're not sure where to start. Don't want to get lost. That's a good one. You know, sometimes it's just removing the fear of what if something happens and what do I do? I've guided a couple families this summer, and one of them specifically, they have traveled all over the country. They've been out west. They were like very capable people, but they still hired us to take their preteens and their family out. And they said later on, it was like purely because they just didn't want to have to think or worry the entire time.
Sure.
They knew I was monitoring and keeping track of everything. I was making sure nobody was getting lost and ensuring that they had a great day as a family without having to worry about anything else.
That's
and
great.
I think that's, you know, that said it. It's like, it's exactly how it should be.
Now, here's a question for you. In your experience as both a child, because I'm sure when you were out in the high peaks, you probably had some days where it wasn't so hot for you. And then, you know, being with families, how do you fix a child's meltdown once it's already started? Once it's obvious that this was a bad idea or this is not going to go well, what have you found to be like a way to remedy that when you're already out there and it's not so easy to just turn around and go back in the car? You might be miles and miles out. So even if you do turn around, it's going to be a process getting back. What have you found to be successful to kind of aid the meltdown in a sense?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think taking a breath and kind of everyone stopping, taking a break, a lot of times just having some food, water, kind of refueling, reset, having a little bit of a pep talk, you know, especially when you're doing a high peak or something a little bit longer. It's like, okay, breaking out the map, like here's where we are and showing them. And a lot of the kids, you know, if they're not really little, they kind of get a grip on, wow, I came so far already. I'm almost there. And they can kind of get themselves a reset. I think even adults, it kind of works the same way. You know, sometimes you're going through a really hard trip and you have to kind of step back and be like, hey, listen, we're only a quarter of a mile from the summit, or we're only 20 minutes out, you know, and they can kind of reset. Do I really want to give up, or do I want to push on? And I would say majority kids and adults, they do want to push on when you start talking about, you know, you've been doing awesome and you've been putting all of your effort in. And so we're just going to take a break for a little bit and hang out, and then we'll reassess and see. And sometimes giving them even that choice to think like, well, maybe I can go back, but do I really want to? Can kind of help. And it really depends on the age of the kids. Little kids, it's pretty hard to turn it around. You know, once they're really having a rough time, sometimes they can cry it out and move on. But generally that's like, okay, we need to take a breath and then head back home.
Sure.
The kids that are like, you know, 9, 10, older, they seem to be able to kind of pull themselves back together.
Yeah, definitely a drastic difference between those two age groups for sure.
Yeah,
I've also found too, you know, going with my daughter, with my nephew, who are young kids, I've found that elevation is actually not the problem. It's mileage. So, for example, I could take my daughter up Big Crow or Mount Joe, which have nice little climbs on them. And, you know, she's 6 years old now. We've been hiking those since when she was 4. I think we took her up Big Crow and Mount Joe. You know, there's steep climbs. And for that age group, she had no problems. It was easy. But then if you do like the long route, the mileage eats her up. And for her, and from my experience with both my nephew and my daughter, the mileage, so if shorter mileage, better, just regardless of the elevation gain. So it's like I'll always take bigger elevation gain, shorter mileage over lower elevation gain, longer mileage. So that's what I've found with the young kids. It's the mileage and the time that eats it up. They actually do really well with the climbing.
Completely agree with you. I think the kids are actually awesome at climbing.
Yeah, totally.
Like you said, like the elevation, I think they really just glide right up. They have no problem. You know, they don't have the joints and the weight and everything that the rest of us do. They just kind of hop right up. And it is those longer treks in, like I was saying, like in a Marcy Dam, it's like by the time they get to the dam, they're just like,
they're done.
Yeah,
for sure.
I'm good. But if you're going up, it's different. And I feel like it gives them the feeling of like getting somewhere. When you're going up, you always feel like you're really accomplishing something. When you're just trucking along, it's kind of boring even for adults. You know, you just have to kind of keep marching along, right foot, left foot. And I think it's both adults and kids that kind of have that same mindset.
Yeah. And for kids too, climbing's the fun part. I mean, for adults, you know, where our hearts are beating, we're huffing and puffing. Kids aren't, though. They're fine. So the climbs are more fun for them. And that at that point, it's like hiking is not it's not like a chore. This is a fun thing. I'm climbing a mountain. Whereas adults are like, oh, look how steep this is. I'm going to be huffing and puffing and breathing so heavily momentarily.
Yeah. Which to me also brings it to the idea of keeping their minds occupied, which the climbing is doing. They're excited and having fun. If you can keep kids occupied mentally, then those longer treks or the kind of more mundane hikes, they will do better. You know, it's like I was saying, like singing, telling stories, you know, looking for signs of wildlife, like tracks and things like that. You know, if you keep them looking and thinking about it all and what's around them, it's a lot more fun. You know, feeling different plants and mosses and, you know, looking for salamanders. Those kind of things are really fun. And if they're feeling engaged with nature, it's awesome on a lot of different levels. I know, you know, we've done a couple times with families like more of like a scavenger hunt type of idea. It's like get the kids to like who can find the most bumpy things, who can find like something squishy, you know, and especially for little kids, it's kind of fun for them.
Cool. Absolutely.
Yeah, to look for stuff like that, or like, if you're in a wetlands, like how many frogs can we spot, that kind of stuff, and just keeping them mentally really stimulated.
Yeah, it makes they're a part of what's happening, and they don't notice the step after step after step.
Right.
So what's your advice as a professional guide and having been a child out on the trail to parents who want to experience the outdoors and,